Step away from the vehicle, now. The officer's voice sliced through the air like a siren, silencing the evening buzz of downtown LA. A half circle of police cruisers blocked the exit of the luxury parking tower. Flashing lights ricocheted off the silver curve of the Lamborghini Huracan, bathing everything in blue and red, and in the middle of it all stood a tall black man, hands slightly raised, dressed in a midnight black suit tailored so clean it caught the wind. He didn't flinch, but the tension in his jaw said everything. Across the street, a small crowd had already gathered, camera phones out, murmurs rising like steam. What did he do? They say he stole the Lambo. He doesn't look like a thief. He looks like the owner. And yet for cops surrounded him, fingers grazing holsters, eyes sharp with assumption. One officer pointed at the car. This vehicle was reported stolen. We need you to lie on the ground, hands behind your back. The man's voice came low, steady. That car is mine. Check the app. The officer's brows knotted. App. A younger cop laughed under his breath. Probably downloaded some fake tracker. Happens all the time. The man didn't move. Instead, he reached slowly, deliberately into his pocket. The gesture alone made the officers flinch, hands tightening on batons. But all he pulled out was a phone, a single tap, and then the Lambo chirped. Its lights blinked, the engine roared to life without a key. A hush fell. People leaned closer, their screens still recording. The headlights glowed like stage lights, aimed straight at the officers now frozen in their assumptions. One woman whispered, "Wait, what kind of app does that? What would you have done in his place? Would you stay calm if armed officers accused you of stealing what you worked your whole life to earn?" Because here's the thing, it wasn't the app that caused chaos next. It was what the app revealed. And that wasn't even the worst part. Stick around, because next I'll show you the moment everything flipped when the officer leaned in to read the man's name and couldn't believe what he saw. But let me ask you, have you ever felt misjudged just for standing next to something expensive? If so, drop the word misread in the comments. You're not alone. The engine purred like a wildcat awakening from sleep. Everyone heard it, and yet none of the officers moved. The headlights kept flashing, like the Lamborghini itself was trying to say, "I belong to him." But then came the snap. "You think that proves anything?" The older officer barked. His voice cracked with authority, but underneath, something else was slipping through. Uncertainty. Or was it pride? He stepped forward and snatched the phone from the man's hand. Just like that, no warning. You could be running a stolen app, spoofed credentials. We've seen it before. The man didn't flinch. He simply looked at the officer, and that stare, calm and unblinking, somehow said more than any word could. "Check the owner profile," he said, quietly, as if daring them. The officer scrolled, his lips parted, a beat passed, and then he hesitated. "What does it say?" asked the rookie beside him. Another beat, registered the Dorian Keys. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people repeated the name aloud, confused, curious. One woman whispered to her boyfriend, "Wait, Dorian Keys, isn't he the guy on the Forbes list?" The rookie frowned. "So that's him." The older officer's jaw clenched. "I still want to see physical registration," he muttered. "Phone apps don't count for property proof." But even as he spoke, the energy shifted. Eyes turned not just toward the cops now, but toward the officer's hesitation. Whispers were no longer about guilt. They were about doubt. And then came the laughter. Not cruel, not mocking. Nervous laughter. Like the whole crowd realized at once they might have just watched a billionaire get profiled. One bystander, a tall man in gym clothes, muttered loud enough for his phone mic to catch it. They just racially profiled the guy who designed the tech that controls his own car. Another voice chimed in. "This is going viral." Still, the officers didn't back down. The one with the phone held it up, challenging. "How do we know you didn't steal the identity?" And that's when Dorian finally moved. He took one step toward the car. Another. The police tensed, hands switching again. But Dorian didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He walked up to the driver's side door and simply looked at it. A soft click. The door rose. No hands, No key. Just a voice command only one person on Earth could trigger. Gasps erupted. Phones tilted, catching every angle. One teenager's jaw dropped as he whispered, "That's AI-level biometric locking." Would you have kept your cool through all that? Imagine being surrounded, accused, touched without consent while cameras rolled and still standing tall. Enough to make the car obey you like a loyal guard dog. But Dorian wasn't done yet. He turned back, finally, and said just one thing. "Do you want the app's name or the company behind it?" Silence fell over the whole block, and that's where it gets terrifying. Because what the officers didn't realize was, they just accused the founder of the tech most apartments now use in their patrol cars. But before I tell you how one sentence from him changed every cop's face on that sidewalk, let me ask you this. Have you ever been so underestimated you almost started to doubt your own worth? Drop a 1 if you've felt that before, or a 0 if you've never had to question your value just because of how people looked at you. I'll wait, because what Dorian did next flipped everything. Dorian didn't need to shout. He never did. The silence around him, that sharp, almost sacred silence, said more than 1,000 angry words ever could. The officer still held his phone, still staring at the screen. But the rookie leaned in, lowering his voice. "Sir, if this is Dorian Keyes, we need to stop talking and start apologizing." Because now, pieces were clicking into place. The name wasn't just a name. It was the name behind VertoSync, the AI-integrated auto security platform, used in over 120 law enforcement departments across the country. Facial recognition, remote shutdown, geofence alerts, every cop in the city used his system. And still, they thought he stole a car. But maybe you're wondering, how did Dorian become that man? Let me take you back for a moment. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Baltimore, the kind of place where the power went out if too many people used the microwave at once. His mother worked night shifts cleaning hotel ballrooms she could never afford to enter as a guest. His father left before he was old enough to remember his face, just a shadow in one photograph, holding a toy car. That toy car mattered. It was a Lamborghini, too, bright yellow, chip paint on the edges. Dorian slept with it under his pillow until he was 10. He didn't dream of driving one. He dreamed of building the kind of world where no one would stop a black boy from believing he could. In high school, he hacked his first door lock not to break in, but to help his mom get back into the apartment after forgetting her keys again. By 19, he'd built a prototype app that used facial recognition to unlock his clunky second-hand Camry. By 25, 3 major car manufacturers were calling. But fame never changed the way people looked at him. Even in boardrooms, even with his name on patents, even with luxury clients, he saw the same narrowed eyes, the same double takes, the same questions, unspoken but loud. "You sure he belongs in here?" Have you ever been in a room where everyone assumes you're the assistant when you're actually the owner? Dorian had, more times than he could count. And so when the officers looked at him like a suspect, not a CEO, he wasn't surprised. Hurt maybe, but surprised no. Because even billionaires bleed under suspicion. And that's why, as his car door lifted and the murmurs spread, Dorian didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just stood there, back straight, eyes calm, letting the world finally catch up. But the cops still had one more mistake to make. Stick around. Because what happened when their sergeant showed up was the moment things really spiraled. But before I go there, tell me honestly, have you ever had to prove yourself in a room that should have already respected you? If yes, drop just one word below, earned. Because some of us are still forced to earn what others are just given. And Dorian was about to make them remember that. Before I tell you what happened when the sergeant arrived, I know you might be busy. Maybe your break is ending. Maybe your phone's at 2%, or maybe your brain just needs to breathe. But if stories like this fascinate you, if injustice that flips into power makes your blood heat just a little, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next, you won't want to miss it. Now back to the street. The sergeant showed up fast. Big man, gray at the temples, tan uniform that looked like it hadn't been dry cleaned in weeks. He stepped out of the squad car with the heavy kind of authority that came from decades of command and too many unspoken rules. He looked around, noticed the crowd, the phones, the way his officers were standing oddly still, like kids who just realized they broke something expensive. "What's going on?" he barked. The older officer, the one who'd taken Dorian's phone, spoke first, voice low, cautious. "Possible stolen vehicle situation, but it might be a false alarm." The sergeant narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, might?" The rookie stepped forward, almost stammering. "Sir, the owner is Dorian Keyes." For a beat, no one moved. Then the sergeant's eyes shifted fast to Dorian, locked on his face, blinked, and something in his expression changed. You ever seen someone recognize a mistake but try to pretend they didn't? He walked over slowly. "You're Dorian Keyes?" he asked. "Yes," Dorian replied, calm, no emotion. "I've read about your work on the smart vehicle systems." His tone softened just enough to suggest he knew. But Dorian didn't help him out. He didn't nod, didn't say, "It's okay." He let the weight hang. The crowd stayed silent, sensing the shift. Then the sergeant turned to his officers. "You can release the scene." They hesitated. "You heard me, step back." Now, one by one, the cops pulled away. The older officer handed Dorian's phone back like it was radioactive. No eye contact. But the tension wasn't over, because that's when one woman in the crowd shouted, "Are you gonna say sorry?" The sergeant froze. A few people echoed her. "Yeah, apologize." "You accuse him like he was trash. He owns half the systems in your cars, for God's sake." The sergeant looked at Dorian. Not the crowd, not the cameras, just him. "I apologize, Mr. Keyes, for the misunderstanding." But it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was profiling. It was power. It was a system on autopilot until it ran headfirst into the man who built it. Dorian nodded once. But that was it, because he wasn't there to win points. He was there to remind them, not every black man in a Lambo is a thief. Some of them built the tech that keeps you safe. But here's where it gets deeper. Because hours later, back in his penthouse, Dorian did something that changed everything, not just for him, but for officers across the country. Want to know what he launched that night? Stick with me. And while you wait, tell me this. If you were in Dorian's shoes, would a public apology be enough? Or would you demand something more? Drop a 1 for enough, or 0 if he'd push further. The apartment was silent. Not quiet silent. The kind of silence you only hear in penthouses perched above the noise. 30 floors up, the city lights looked like a scatter of low stars. But Dorian wasn't looking out the window. He was looking at his phone. The screen showed the still frame from earlier, his face, calm, lit by police headlights. Surrounded by uniforms, already, the video had passed 300,000 views. By morning, it would be millions. But that wasn't what bothered him. It was the comments, not the racist ones. Those were predictable. It was the well-meaning ones that hurt more. They should have known he was somebody. Once they saw his title, they backed off. And beneath every praise was a bitter truth. If he wasn't Dorian Keyes, he might have been cuffed. Or worse, he didn't want gratitude for surviving the profiling. He wanted it to stop happening. And so, sitting there, alone, wrapped in soft shadows and cold clarity, he opened a folder labeled Project Sentinel. For months, he'd been testing something new, an extension of VertoSync, but more radical. A system designed not just for cars but for justice. Real-time civilian verification, facial data cross-reference with state ID, since with police logs not to expose suspects, but to protect the innocent. Not just to prove ownership, but to stop escalation. But he'd hesitated launching it. Too many legal hurdles. Too much pushback from departments who didn't want their biases automated and exposed. But now it wasn't just code. It was personal. He tapped the screen, sent a single command to his engineers. Greenlight Sentinel. In under 10 seconds, a secured network pulsed to life. Encryption activated. Deploy protocols engaged. The platform would roll out in 3 cities within a week. By month's end, dozens. And as he sat back, watching the progress bar turn green, he felt something unexpected. Not relief, responsibility. Because this wasn't just about protecting people like him. It was about protecting people who didn't have a billion-dollar company or a famous name or a Lamborghini that could talk. People who didn't get apologies, who didn't have the moment caught on camera, who got profiled and silenced. Have you ever done something out of anger only to realize later it was really about love? Dorian had, right then, not love for the system, but love for the people the system forgot. But he knew a rollout like this would cause waves, especially in departments that weren't ready to be challenged. He knew there would be backlash, and he was right, because 48 hours later, a powerful city council member tried to block the Sentinel pilot and did it live on camera. But Dorian, he was ready. Stick around, because what he revealed during that press conference made the entire room freeze. But before we go there, tell me, would you risk your entire company just to fix a system that tried to break you? Drop one word below. Push if you'd go all in, or protect if you'd rather not lose everything for a bigger cause. Because Dorian, he didn't even blink. They thought he wouldn't show up, that he'd back down, keep quiet, move on like most people told they should just be grateful. But Dorian Keyes walked into City Hall like he owned the blueprint to the entire place. And in a way he did. Dark navy suit, no tie, eyes forward, calm, but coiled like a lion that had already calculated the distance to every exit. Reporters turned their heads. Flashbulbs flickered. Microphones stretched forward like claws. At the front, behind a curved wooden desk, sat Councilman Harold Leston Gray's suit, smug smile. Reputation built on order and protocol. He cleared his throat. Mr. Keyes, while we acknowledge your contributions to innovation, we believe Project Sentinel poses privacy concerns. We cannot allow facial recognition to dictate law enforcement response. Dorian didn't flinch. He stepped to the podium, paused, let the silence stretch until even the live stream viewers leaned closer. Then, calmly, he said, "Councilman, I agree facial recognition alone should never dictate how someone is treated." A murmur in the crowd. Confusion? Was he backing down? But Dorian continued. That's why Sentinel doesn't dictate. It documents. He tapped a remote. Behind him, a screen lit up. A dashboard appeared, clean, sleek, showing footage. Footage of him, from 48 hours ago. Surrounded, accused, unarmed, calm. He pressed play. The crowd watched the officers shout, grab his phone, reach for cuffs. Then the car unlocking itself. The shift in power. The silence. And finally, his own voice. Do you want the app's name or the company behind it? Then he froze the frame. Dorian, mid-glance. Lights behind him. Headlines waiting to be born. He turned to the council. This is not about tech. It's about truth. He pointed to the crowd. How many times have we said, we need to see what really happened? Sentinel sees. Another pause. Not just for people like me who can afford lawyers and cameras and press conferences, but for every kid walking home in the wrong neighborhood wearing the wrong hoodie. Gasps. Because he wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was turning the courtroom into a classroom. And then the twist. He tapped again. The screen changed. A heat map appeared, glowing red and yellow. Every incident of wrongful profiling in this city logged by citizens in the last 12 months. Hundreds of data points. Names blurred. But the pattern was clear. Same neighborhoods, same faces, same outcomes. Except none of them had Lamborghinis, or apps, or headlines. This, Dorian said, is not a privacy issue. It's a public safety issue. Leston tried to interrupt. Mr. Keyes. But Dorian cut in. Just once. Just loud enough. I'm not here for approval. I'm here for accountability. And the room, still. Because when the man you tried to profile now controls the room, that's not a tech pitch. That's a reckoning. Have you ever watched someone turn their pain into a weapon and aim it at the very system that created it? That's what this moment was. But it wasn't the end, because later that night, someone tried to sabotage Sentinel's servers, and that led to something Dorian never saw coming. Stick around, because next, I'll show you what happens when power fights back from the shadows. But first let me ask you, if you had proof of something unjust, would you make it public, even if it made powerful enemies? Type light if yes, or wait, if you'd think twice. Because Dorian lit the match, and now the fire was coming. The alert came in at 3:17 a.m. No sound, just a blinking notification on a secure server buried beneath layers of encryption. Unauthorized attempt detected. Location, off-grid. Target, Sentinel Core Node 1. Dorian didn't wait to the buzz. He woke to the feeling. You ever feel it? That eerie stillness, like the world's holding its breath before something breaks. He sat up, heart already accelerating, grabbed the tablet off the nightstand, and froze. The map glowed red. One of Sentinel's servers, a physical node hidden in a co-working space leased under a shell company, had just been pinged by an intrusion algorithm sophisticated enough to mask its IP for to full seconds. To seconds. To most people, that meant nothing. To Dorian, it meant the attack didn't come from amateurs. It came from someone with access. Someone who knew where to aim. He called the lead engineer. Lock Node 1. Reroute data flows. Isolate from cloud sync. Now. Yes, sir. Already in motion. He exhaled. But that peace didn't last long. Because 20 minutes later, a second alert hit. Different node. Different city. And this time they didn't just try to breach it. They wiped it clean. A hard kill. Gone. He stared at the screen, fingers tightening around the edge of the tablet. Someone wasn't just scared. They were willing to destroy. But here's the thing about Dorian Keyes. He didn't build things that break easy. He built fail-safes, redundancies, hidden storage mirrors, quantum backup triggers. Even when they thought they deleted Sentinel's data, it was still alive. But the message was clear. This wasn't about surveillance concerns. It was war. You ever had someone attack you? Not with fists, but with silence and money and lawyers and code. Because that's what this was. A digital lynching dressed up in cybersecurity jargon. Dorian leaned back, eyes flicking toward the city skyline outside his window. He knew how they worked. They wouldn't smear him in headlines. They'd make him look like a threat, a liability, a disruption to peace. But they forgot one thing. He had proof. Proof of every attack. Logs, signatures, timestamps, and a few phone numbers in his contacts that could light up the rooms. These people met in behind closed doors. But he didn't call them yet. Not that night. That night, he stared into the screen, watched the blinking logs, and whispered to words only he could hear. They're scared. Because only fear makes people strike before dawn. Only fear makes a system risk exposing itself just to silence one man. But Dorian wasn't the one who should be afraid. Because the next morning, he walked into a tech conference full of executives who once rejected him. And in front of them all, he played the security footage of the second attack. On loop. Stick around. Because in the next part, what he said on that stage with every camera rolling made 3 sponsors pull out within the hour. But let me ask you something first. If someone tried to erase your work, would you fight back quietly? Or would you put it all on display? Comment expose if you'd show the world. Or guard if you'd wait for the right time. Because Dorian, he didn't wait another second. The conference ballroom smelled like polished oak, citrus cologne, and quiet money. Men in bespoke suits, women in minimalist couture, badges hanging from silk lanyards like flags of invisible nations. This was the place where deals happened, the kind made over champagne and sealed in backrooms. And today Dorian Keyes walked right into it. Alone, no entourage, no slides, no pitch deck, just him. And a flash drive in his jacket pocket that could make or break 3 reputations. The host announced his name, and some in the room clapped politely. Others didn't, because they knew, or at least they guessed. They'd heard rumors of the Sentinel attacks, but no one expected Dorian to bring receipts. He stepped onto the stage, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the sea of faces, all powerful, all polished, all pretending. Then, without greeting, he plugged in the drive. The screen behind him lit up. Footage, server logs, time-stamped attempts from IPs traced back to firms in that very room. The crowd shifted. He didn't accuse. He didn't name names. He just let the data speak, line by line, frame by frame, until silence wasn't a courtesy, it was suffocation. Then he said, "This isn't about code. It's about fear." He stepped aside, clicked the next slide. 3 logos appeared, big ones. One belonged to a predictive policing software company, one to a security firm contracted by over a dozen US cities, and one to a hedge fund with silent ties to all of them. Gasps. He still didn't say a word, but he didn't have to, because people talk. Whispers flooded the room like a virus, and within the hour 3 sponsors of the event pulled out, quietly, desperately. Have you ever watched people scramble to erase their fingerprints from something they thought no one would trace back? That's what Dorian watched. But here's the twist. He didn't stop there. He leaned back into the mic and said, "Project Sentinel isn't going away. It's already in 18 cities. And starting next quarter, it'll be available to every civilian for free." That was the shot. Not at the corporations, at the system. Because now, ordinary people could document encounters, record patterns, upload live reports. No red tape, no gatekeeping. Just truth made public. A woman from the back stood and clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted. Not everyone, of course. Some still sat frozen, fuming. But the tide had turned, and Dorian, he walked off the stage without looking back. He didn't need applause. He had momentum. But that night, in a hotel hallway lined with mirrors, someone left a message on his door. No name, no return address, just a note, scrawled in black ink. "You're next. Stick around." Because in the next part, we find out who left the note and why Dorian didn't call the police. But real quick, would you go public like that knowing the people in that room could ruin you? Drop one word, reckon, if you'd go all in, or retreat if you play it safe. Because Dorian chose his side, and now the gloves were off. He didn't call security. He didn't call the police. He just stood there in the hallway holding the note. "You're next." Black ink, slanted handwriting, slight pressure on the downstrokes, someone used to writing in cursive, but rushing. Dorian didn't feel fear. He felt confirmation. Because you only threaten someone when you know you've already lost control. He walked back inside the suite, locked the door behind him, and scanned the hallway through the peephole. Empty, silent. But he knew who sent it. Not by name, by method. See, in Dorian's world, threats rarely came with fists. They came with paper, with contracts, with back-channel whispers. This one was personal, but the timing made it strategic. Earlier that day, one of the firms he'd indirectly exposed, a predictive analytics company with federal ties, had issued a public statement. They denied involvement, but buried in legalese, they hinted that certain parties had violated confidentiality agreements via inappropriate public disclosures. Translation: they were prepping a lawsuit, and Dorian was ready, because what they didn't know or maybe forgot was that he still had access to everything, including archived emails, including one thread dated 18 months earlier. Subject: suppressing community facial bias triggers dev request. The thread contained a phrase he'd never forget. Build in filters to exclude reports from certain neighborhoods. Avoid overflagging patrol behavior. They called it optimization. But Dorian knew what it was. Suppression. He opened his laptop, found the file, and copied it to a new folder, labeled Failsafe Press Ready. Then, he made one call. Not to a lawyer, to a journalist, an old contact from before the fame, before the tech, before the suits and cars and stages. Someone who still remembered him as the kid with a hoodie full of fire and a second-hand laptop. He didn't say much, just, "I've got something," unredacted. The journalist replied, "If it's real, I'll run it front page, national." "It's real," Dorian said, "and it's Tom." Have you ever had to use the truth as both shield and sword? Dorian had, many times. But this time, he was swinging first. And 48 hours later, the story broke. Front page, black and white, no filters. Leaked emails reveal efforts to bury racial bias reports in predictive policing tech. The headline went viral in under 4 hours. By morning, 3 investigations had been launched. 2 internal execs had been suspended. 1 board resigned in full. But the real kill shot wasn't the article. It was the last line in the piece. A direct quote from Dorian. "You don't fix broken systems with silence. You fix them by exposing the parts no one wants to see." And just like that, the silence broke. Stick around. Because next, we go way back to the moment Dorian first realized tech could be weaponized against him, and why the childhood moment changed how he built everything. But let me ask you, have you ever held onto something in email, a screenshot, a truth waiting for the moment it would matter? Comment held if you've been there, or lost if the chance passed before you could act. Because Dorian, he never let anything go, and now neither did the world. It started with a flashlight and a plastic lunchbox. Dorian was 11, late summer in Baltimore. His mom had just finished a night shift and left a sandwich in the fridge with a note. "Don't wait up, lock the door." He'd woken early, too excited to sleep. It was his first day at the STEM summer camp. A scholarship got him in full ride, thanks to a math teacher who saw something in him. He wore a button-down shirt that was too big, sleeves rolled. His shoes were clean. He even brought his own notebook filled with doodles of circuits and gears. The bus stop was for blocks away, and at 6:52 a.m., he was halfway there when the cruiser pulled up. Blue lights off, but the window rolled down. "Hey," one officer called out. "Where you headed this early?" Dorian froze. He held up his lunchbox. "Camp," he said, voice small. The second cop stepped out. "Camp. Oh, mind if we take a look inside that box?" He handed it over. Inside, sandwich, apple, juice pouch, and a crumpled brochure with the camp logo. Still, they asked more questions. "Where do you live? You sure your parents know where you are? Why you walking alone?" The flashlight clicked on, shined right into his eyes in daylight. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there, holding his breath. 5 minutes later, they let him go. No apology. Just, "Be careful out here, son." He missed the bus. He got to camp late, and when the counselor asked him what happened, Dorian just said, "Wrong place, wrong face." Have you ever learned, too young, that authority doesn't always mean safety? That morning stayed with him, not because they heard him, but because they could have. And no one would have believed an 11-year-old black boy with a lunchbox over to uniformed officers with badges. That moment, it became code. Lines buried in every platform he ever built. Fail-safes, logs, self-activating cloud syncs. Because he didn't trust the silence anymore. He didn't want justice after. He wanted proof during. That's why Sentinel wasn't just a product. It was a promise. To the 11-year-old he once was. And the thousands who still walk down sidewalks wondering, will they stop me, too? Stick around. Because in the next part, Dorian's past and present collide. Someone from the very camp, someone he never forgot, shows up unexpectedly and brings with them a secret that changes everything. But tell me, have you ever built your whole life around proving one moment wrong? If yes, drop the word memory, because some memories don't fade. They turn into fire. And Dorian, he was just getting warm. He didn't recognize her at first. Not until she said 5 words. "You still draw those circuits." Dorian turned, slowly. There she stood, mid-30s now, curls pinned back, wearing a lanyard from the Civic Tech Summit, but her eyes hadn't changed. Big, fierce, focused. "Keisha." She nodded, smiling. "Still remember the lunchbox and the duct tape notebook?" He laughed, a sound he hadn't made all week. Keisha had been his seatmate at the camp. Back then, she was the only one who didn't flinch when he started sketching surveillance sensors instead of toy robots. Now, she was a lead engineer for a nonprofit building community safety AI in low-income districts. And more than that, she had something Dorian hadn't seen in a while. Hope. not cautious optimism. Real hope. Sentinel woke people up, she said. But some of us have been building in the background, quietly, waiting for a voice loud enough to break the ceiling. She reached into her bag, pulled out a thumb drive. This is our pilot project. Unfunded, ignored, until last week. Now they're finally listening because you cracked the surface. Dorian took the drive, plugged it into his laptop. Data filled the screen. A full AI safety ecosystem built not for top-down control, but bottom-up protection. Community-led alert systems. Bias detection feedback loops. School-based consent protocols for teen interactions with authority. And one line of code that made his jaw tighten. Protect the child before the question. He looked up. You wrote this. Keisha nodded. After Tamir. After Elijah. After too many names. They sat in silence. Have you ever had someone bring you back to who you were before the noise, the stage, the fear? Keisha didn't ask for money or spotlight. She asked for alignment, and Dorian had never felt more seen. You want Sentinel to integrate with this? He asked. No, she replied. I want you to. That's when it hit him. All this time, he'd been fighting from above on stages, in headlines, behind firewalls. But the roots, they were down here, in neighborhoods with broken streetlights and working kids and too many funeral programs, folded into church bulletins. Dorian stood. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black pen, and signed the agreement right there on the cafe napkin. A partnership, a promise, a way back to the boy with the lunchbox and the flashlight in his eyes. But just as they sealed it, Dorian's phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an anonymous sender. Subject line, tonight. Attached was a live video link, and what he saw stopped his breath. Stick around, because in the final part, the story circles back to the street, and the danger that once found Dorian comes for someone else. But this time, he's watching. But before I show you, have you ever met someone who reminded you who you were before the world told you to be quiet? Drop the word, banker, because we all need one. And Keisha, she just became his. The street looked familiar, not because Dorian had been there before, but because he'd seen it before, in reports, and videos, in too many stories with names that blurred together under hashtags and candlelight vigils. Except this time, he was watching it live. The feed came from a community user on the new Sentinel X Keisha pilot, a teenage boy, 14, hoodie, backpack, walking home after tutoring, stopped, surrounded, 2 officers, flashlights, one hand on a holster, one shouting questions too fast for the kid to answer. And that same tension, that same air Dorian remembered from age 11 was thick in the video. Except this time, there was a blue dot blinking in the corner. Sentinel active, biometric recording engaged, public log streaming, and in real time, over 1,200 viewers were now tuned in watching, witnessing. Dorian tapped the interface. Location ping, South Baltimore. 6 minutes from Keisha's field office. He called her. Activate proximity protocol. She didn't ask why. She just said, already moving. Meanwhile, on the screen, one officer grabbed the kid's wrist. Too hard, too fast. But just before it escalated, a voice rang out from the side. Hey, he's in the system. Sentinel flagged him as AFE. It was a school counselor. She'd seen the ping on her phone, part of the new Trusted Youth badge built into the pilot. She stepped forward, arms open, no sudden movements. He's in tutoring every Tuesday. You can check the timestamp. He's no threat. The officers froze, looked at each other, then slowly backed off. No apology, no handshake, just a retreat. But for the boy, it meant everything. The camera panned to his face, stunned, breathing hard, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. And Dorian, he didn't cry. He smiled. Because for the first time, the code worked before the cuffs. The system didn't wait to prove innocence. It protected it. Have you ever watched a moment repeat only this time? You get to rewrite the ending. That night, Dorian released a single statement across all platforms. No speech, no press conference. Just 5 words. This is only the beginning. And in the weeks that followed, Give's Sentinel spread to 48 cities. Give's over 2,000 wrongful stops were flagged and prevented. Give's a congressional hearing was launched not to ban the tech, but to expand it. But more than that, kids like that boy on the screen started walking differently. Shoulders a little higher, eyes forward. Like maybe, just maybe, the world didn't get to treat them like threats by default. And Dorian, he went back to the lab, because the fight wasn't over. But finally the silence was. So now, it's your turn. If you've ever been misjudged, if you've ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken, or let something slide because no one believed you, you know what the story is really about. Comment below just one word, ready. Because like Dorian said, this is only the beginning.